What's up? Que lo que et salut, world language teachers. Welcome to the Practical Proficiency Podcast, where we make the transition to proficiency-oriented instruction in your world language class in a way that works for you, your unique context and teaching style, and doesn't sacrifice your well-being along the way. I'm your host, Devin Gunning, the teacher, author, conference host, curriculum creator, and consultant behind La Libre Language Learning. This podcast is for the creative world language teacher like you, who's ready to ditch the overwhelming pressure of switching to acquisition-driven instruction and CI overnight. You're ready to discover how using more target language in class can actually bring you and your students more joy instead of adding to your plate. With practical, authentic, and down-to-earth strategies that don't require reinventing the wheel or more training, we'll work together towards the magic of a community-based, target language-rich classroom rooted in the power of community and comprehensible input. Let's go! Welcome, everybody. I am so excited to welcome back a special guest. Kia London is here with me today on the Practical Proficiency Podcast. If you are watching or listening, thank you so much for being here. And thank you, Kia, for joining me again and being my first repeat guest on the Practical Proficiency Podcast. This is going to be so fun. I'm really excited to hear about your year teaching this year. So tell us a little bit more about you and what your school year is like this year.
All right. Awesome. First of all, Devin, thank you so much for inviting me back on. I'm super excited to be able to chat with you. And hey, Cal, what's going on? So I've been teaching for 19 years. It feels like yesterday, honestly, but when 2025 rolled around, I was like, oh my gosh, it's been 19 years. So it goes very, very fast. And I've been teaching Spanish. I've literally taught every grade level K through 12, and I spent a lot of years in the middle school. So I want to say maybe close to like 9 years. So middle school definitely like has my heart. There's a piece of me there with middle school. And now I'm back to high school. So I started my journey of teaching at the high school level. And so now I'm back to high school, which has really been good. So yeah, so like there's a lot of things going on. I've definitely slowed the pace. It seems as if like the pace slowed down for me in the fall. Normally I'm, either facilitating something, a conference or presenting. And so I remember telling myself specifically that for the fall, I wanted to, take it easy because I'm in a new school community. I'm teaching at the high school I graduated from, which is pretty cool. But so yeah, so there's been a lot of change, but we're still moving forward, which is awesome.
I
Yeah.
admire that you're giving yourself the much needed space to move into a new realm of life. This is something that I never do and need to do more of. So that is wonderful because that's so much on your plate, transitioning to a new school as well. That's something I think that we can forget about a lot when we're thinking about what it's like to be a teacher. I've taught at 3 different schools in a rather short career and moved for various reasons. And like every single time it is, oh wow, I'm like getting used to a whole new big system again. So tell me a little bit about that too. Like you're an experienced teacher, like exactly what it means to teach Spanish. But did you experience a little bit of that going into a new school environment, especially with, I know you were telling me the last time you were on here that you were excited to be back in your old stomping ground, in your old community.
Yeah. I know for me, like going from so like I came from a school where we had a pretty like large team.
Mm.
And so we were on a journey. I mean, the goals were set for proficiency. Like that was just like that was the expectation, and that was how we were facilitating instruction. And so now I truly do want to applaud and shout out the teachers that I now work with in the department, because they are beginning and getting like into that journey. So it's been really cool, like just hearing the conversations like in the department meetings, and hearing like their thought process about, well, what about this? And maybe we can do it this way. Um, so that part has been really, really interesting, for me to hear as well. And so coming in, again, like I've told people like, yeah, I went to high school here, but again, you know, teaching a different generation, a new generation of students, um being in so on our high school in our high school we have two campuses, like our campus is like huge. And so there's a north building and there's a south building, and so I'm in the north building, which is where world language is. And so when I was there, world language was like in the south building. So there's a little bit of nostalgia there, but at the same time, I think too, as far as building connections and relationships with the students, that definitely helped a little bit in my favor. So it wasn't like, like, well, she's just coming in and we don't know, but being able to say, like, yeah, I graduated from here. Oh, you did? Okay. Like, okay, so um, but yeah, but there's a lot. I mean, there's a new teacher cohort that I'm like a part of, and it's really there for the purposes of providing support, like onboarding support for teachers that are new to our school community. And so the cohort that I'm in right now, everybody has taught before. So like everybody has experience, like maybe from like 5 to 10, 15 years. But there's so many things that you have to learn. Like there's a system, and every school community has a different culture. And I'll never forget the principal. He said to us, this was back in July, where he just said, um, what the acronym was, BYOB. And I was like, okay, I think we know, like, what I know, like, okay, like BYOB, like, let's go. And right, and I remember some of us chuckling, like, he's like, no, 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 I'm not talking about that. And he said, bring your own brand. And I thought that was really interesting, and it really assured and brought, like some encouragement of just like, okay, yes, I am a part of a larger department. Like we have a pretty big department. And also, that doesn't necessarily mean that I need to put away who I am as a teacher and what I normally do. So I really appreciate, him for that, that the importance of, being authentic, because ultimately we want to be authentic with our students. They can see through anything, especially if we're not being authentic to who we are.
So true.
So yeah, yeah.
That's very reaffirming too. I like that it's got a nice, catchy tagline for a way for teachers to explore their own autonomy without having fear of, running up against barriers or boundaries with what the school culture is, that you can reaffirm your own identity and contribute to what you're joining instead of having to conform to what you're joining. That's a really cool way to see it. I'm hoping that anybody who is either a new teacher or in the same position as you who's listening or watching this can absorb that and say that I can take that into my own school culture too, that this is something that I can be a part of, and I'm BYOB. Yeah, that's great. So tell me more about this interesting transition that you mentioned about a change of pace with your students. You mentioned to me briefly before we started the recording that the school that you came from, these students had a different amount of Spanish before they came to you. And now you're having to change a lot of your pacing structure and the way that you approach Spanish class. So tell me a little bit more about that and what that's looked like.
Yeah, I so in my previous school community, again, very large department across middle and upper school. There was I just even remember when I started there, like I had to quote unquote like up my game from where I was coming from, and that was like 4.5, 4 years ago. And so the students there they were accustomed to a level of proficiency with hearing the target language at least 95, 98% of the time.
Mm.
And I remember coming in, I came from another middle school and I was just getting to the point with the students that I taught at that previous middle school of, introducing them to proficiency and, comprehensible input strategy. So when I started in my previous school community, I had to like up my game, like incredibly. And I really am thankful for that because it really not only are you really able to look at the multifaceted way as far as like how learners are able to like acquire the language, but it also prepares you for a number of different situations like in the classroom. And so in my previous school community, a lot of the students, like there was an elementary Spanish program. So they had it from, if they were enrolled like at the preschool level, they had it all the way preschool, all the way up through fourth grade. And so I taught fifth and sixth grade. And I remember just thinking I was, like going at a good pace, and they were just like, no, more. Like we could deal with more, So anyway, so fast forward to now, that I will say that was my biggest adjustment. Like I had to figure out like, okay, how can I still ensure that they are getting all the input that they need, still staying, and again, I say this for me within the 90% or more target language, um, and challenging them to do so, because I know that with a lot of my students, I teach freshmen, sophomores, and juniors. And so with a lot of the incoming freshmen, I don't think, at least from my observation, quite a few of them were not accustomed to hearing like the target language as much as they heard it with me. So that was one adjustment. Um, the other thing too was being, kind of like walking the fine line of like, okay, I want to push you all, but at the same time, I don't want you to be discouraged if you're not able to get it like the first time around. Um, so that was definitely an adjustment. And then I mean, I even had a few parents that were just for lack of a better words, it was like, are you sure you know what you're doing? And I'm like, because for them, it was new too, because for all I know, their students had, Spanish teachers that approach language, differently than I do. So, that was something else. But one thing I will say, as far as like slowing the pace and, changing the pace up per se, in our new teacher academy, we talked about cultural responsive teaching. And this is something that I'm, very, very well versed in. And I remember specifically one of the instructional coaches was just saying, she kept reiterating, like, you know, chunking when it comes to whenever you're teaching a topic, rather than, feel like you have to get through every single thing, but like take it apart, chunk it, scaffold, i.e., and so forth. And so I remember first semester where I had thought that I'm like, oh yeah, I'm scaffolding enough. This is what they need. And then finding out like, okay, no, no, you need to do it, like even more. And so that was a very different process for me, as far as being patient, with that. And so, I mean, the students definitely like taught me, um, that. And I can say now, in terms of where we're at, as a group, we're at the point where I can pile on like even a little bit more because of being able to take that time and being patient with them, in terms of just where they were at. And so yeah, so it's been good. It's definitely, been good. And I feel like too, and I'm speaking for myself, where you teach somewhere for a while and you get accustomed to like a certain level of like expectation, with the students. And so when you make a transition and then it's like, okay, well, wait, all right, hold on, so it's always good. I feel like that there's a sense of humility that like kind of comes with that. But also being mindful that as teachers too, like we have to continue to be flexible. Um, in any given day, in any given situation, and being able to meet, our students where they're at as well.
Wow, there's so much there. I'm excited to dive into this. This feels very reaffirming to know that that patience is the number one thing that is paid off for you, of being patient with yourself in this learning process, of understanding that you're reminding me that each time that you work with a new group of students, it's a learning process. You're learning how they work and what they need, and that it's important to be flexible with the stuff that you're planning to teach, because you never know how students are going to react to it and what kind of timing they really need. And your students, it sounds like they, and their parents too, sometimes were a little bit shell shocked by it. How would you say, what was that timeline you think that it took them? Now we're recording this around the beginning of February. So what does that timeline looked like for, because I know there's a lot of people listening who are diving into this experience themselves. I've been talking with a lot of and you've given a course for them before with all your expertise. With my members, there's a lot of people who are trying this whole concept of using a lot of target language, and they're in the beginning journeys of this. Walk us through a little bit of what did that timeline look like for your students, of starting to feel like, oh, that like first initial anxiety of this is a lot of language, to like, okay, I'm finally used to this. What did that look like for the majority of your students, time-wise?
I would say for the majority of my students, an entire semester. Like it took the
Yeah.
entire semester, and I wasn't really expecting that. I think I can think of a few, not a few, but like a percentage of students that were like, okay, yeah, maybe by like November-ish or like December. But majority as a whole, it took an entire semester. Um, and I think too, the important thing too is like believing that believing that your students can, understand and comprehend you like in the target language, and not like quote unquote like backing down, you know.
Ooh,
Um
yeah.
and and I think that that's really important because in the beginning when I think of the beginning of the year, like I was kind of, I was a little tough. And I just remember, a variety of ways where it's like if they weren't able to understand me. So taking them through the process of number one, like using the room. Um, that's a huge piece. Like I just remember the beginning of the year, the first thing I wanted to do before school started, I was like, I have to set up my room. And it wasn't because, oh, I want to, have like fancy decorations. It was because I wanted to get my students to the place where they were able to not only understand what I was saying, understand what they were reading, depending on what the content was, but also being able to communicate with me and being able to communicate with each other, like during that talking time. So I have things like on my wall, such as like the sweet 16s, the verbs, we have the super sevens, the interrogatives, as different phrases popped up and as their vocabulary grew, I would just add more things, just like on the wall. Like, I mean, we have a there's a staff that comes in and does like cleaning in our rooms. And the ladies, I'm sure they're probably like, "Ay, esa hija," they're like, because I always have signs on my whiteboard that say don't erase. It's in Spanish. I'm like, don't erase the board. So because it's really important. And then I've also grown to see and know that they do depend on that as like additional scaffolding, which is perfectly fine for me. Because they're novice learners. I teach novice learners. Some of them are approaching novice high at this point, but mainly like novice mid, novice low and so forth. So it's, that part was really important. And then being able to like, okay, what do we say when we have to go to the bathroom? Like having that sign up, puedo ir al baño, and then it's like, well, can I go? I'm like, en español? They're like, oh, it's London. I'm like, yeah, I'm like, it's right there. You can do it. And so that was huge. That was like a huge step. And then consistently coming back to it, a lot of repetition, a lot of, I call it like recycling repetition. Like as we would move forward in a unit, okay, we're going to go back and we're going to pick up these few things with us and then move forward again, go back, pick up these things with us. So there's like a constant cycle of like, review, repeat, going back a little bit and moving forward. Um, and so that was really, those are a few tips. Yes, those are a few tips that were very, very, very helpful. Yeah. Yeah.
That is a great mantra to have in your head too. Review, repeat, go back, and then move forward. I really like that sequence. That's a nice way to follow it.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause too, and, this was a discussion. We have like a PLC on Wednesday mornings. And so with our department, and I was listening into just some of the conversations, and it's very easy to get caught up into, depending on whether or not you're using a textbook or not. I know with our department we don't use a textbook, um, but it's very easy to get in that mode of just like, okay, we did this unit, we're going to move on to this one, and then we're going to move on to this one. But we want to make sure that we, I understand it's like there are certain things that we do want our students to be able to do and be able to know. But at the same time, you also want them to be able to be in a place in which they are acquiring it. And so the brain is, processing, certain things. So going back, reviewing so that they can see it in a variety of different contexts is just, yeah, incredibly needed. It's essential to be able to do. But yeah, yeah.
How did you adjust when you knew the pace was too fast for students?
I I want to say first thing, really, I mean, they really are my feedback. Like they give me feedback. Um, so one example that comes to mind is that we use Google Classroom as like our LMS, our learning management system. And so I remember just coming in, like I knew that where I was teaching that there was an expectation for homework. There was an expectation. And so I was like, okay, and I remember assigning like a couple assignments a week, like on Google Classroom. And number one, I got like near to like burned out because I couldn't keep up with it. Not that I was grading everything, but again, if you're giving assignments for students to record themselves, in the language, like you're listening and you're giving them feedback. So um that was number one. And then number two, like I was getting a very, very small percentage of students that were just turning it in. And I was just like, okay. So that showed me one thing, that it was just that they were not like keeping up. And there's all sorts of reasons why. It's either I have sports or I have an activity after school, or it's, well, I had to do my AP homework first and
Mhm.
then your class. And so what I decided to do second quarter was I said, okay, I said, I'm going to post one Google Classroom assignment a week. You all have 3 days. And then I really started being mindful of the activities that we were doing in class so that I was assessing them more in class and utilizing that information in order to be able to use that for, as far as like how they were doing in the grade book. And so I definitely saw a huge change with that. There were definitely I got more students submitting things. There was more engagement in class. And it was definitely a wonderful thing. And then too, I know with this group is, they'll go through phases where they don't really want to talk, where it's like if I'm asking a question in the target language and if I don't get like that whole group response, I have my little cards, and so they're like, oh, they're like, Ms. London. I'm like, pues, I'm like, nobody's talking. You all. Um, and so when I would find that even when I went to the cards and, would call on certain people, and I was very strategic too. You have your high level learners and you have your mid and you have your low level learners. And so um, that was really a gauge for me, depending on whether or not things were going over their head because I was going too fast, or whether or not they were, definitely with me. So there were many times where I was just like, okay, I'm like, okay, we're going to go back. We're going to go back. We're going to review this. And so I really, yeah, I mean, they were really, and they still are like a guide, to let me know whether or not I'm moving too fast or if I am, going like too slow, if we can like up the pace. So the student feedback was huge. It is just a huge piece. Yeah.
I think that perspective is really refreshing of how much actual participation your students are giving you in terms of like who's turning in what and how much and how often is a form of feedback in a lot of ways, and that there's a lot of room for adjustments instead of just giving up and saying that they're lazy or whatever it might be, that there's a lot of feedback to be had, and that your students actually like there might be a lot more to the story than what you're seeing on the surface. And that it seems like too that since you have a like a target language rich classroom is highly interactional and is based off of interactions, you're going to it feels like you have a natural feedback loop fed in there, and you have to just pay attention to what those cues are. So what do you find are the cues? So you talked about like you're not getting a lot of responses in class. Like, how do you tell the difference between like, oh, they're just not in it today, I got to pull out my conversation cards, or how do you know that like, oh, this is over their heads, I need to change the pace?
Yeah, I know. I'm a big fan of, being able to see like their body language.
Mhm.
Um, for example, this one particular student I'm thinking of, she, high level learner, and I remember I had asked a question pertaining to a lesson. I don't remember what it was, and she didn't know and she wasn't able to answer it, and for a couple of reasons. Like it wasn't that she didn't understand what I was asking her, but it was just kind of like, oh gosh, I don't know, or I'm not sure, or I forgot. And so for me, like, okay, that, like, she's a high level learner, like if she's not there with me, then I need to dial it back, because then that means that the rest of them are just like not with me at all. Um, Something else that I've also done too is they're very big on like the head nods, you know. Typically it's like entienden, entendemos, and they're like, no. It's either no, it's no say, or either it's, and then when I'm like, okay, hay preguntas, you know, and I'll get no, and then all of a sudden we'll go to the activity, and then I overhear, I don't even know what we're doing. And I'm like, wait a minute, wait. Okay. I'm like, you all. I'm like in English. I'm like, I just asked you, hay preguntas, and no one said anything. I'm like, so we're gonna do this again. I'm like, hay preguntas. They're like, see, And I remember going through that because I wanted them to get to a place of being able to, if there was something that they did not understand, I wanted them to get to a place of, I am comfortable saying that I don't understand. Either I don't understand you or I don't understand what it is we're supposed to be doing. And I remember taking them through that where I would ask, like, hay preguntas, and it would be this, or it'd be like, no, hay preguntas. And then we would go to the activity, and then I would watch them and nobody would move.
Mhm.
And then I'd be like, right, and I'd be like, okay, you all just told me you didn't have any questions yet. No one was moving. I'm like, okay, so do we, and so that was a big learning moment for me too. Um, and then from there, something else I started doing, I would model out what exactly I wanted them to do. And so I would ask for a volunteer and I would model it out in Spanish. Um, and then I would ask the group, like, okay, entienden? Some of them would get it because they would be watching, like, oh, yeah, okay, this is what we're going to be doing. And then you had others that were just like, no. So then I would do it again. And then by that second time around, I would get a little bit more. So then I said, okay, let me get creative here. So at times I'll have like a student like summarize, like, okay, what are we supposed to be doing? So and so. Okay, yeah, we're going to be doing this and then this blah, 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 blah. Okay. So those are just, a few ways, a few things, a few things like I've had to try. But yeah,
That is
yeah.
that's a very helpful run through too, because I feel like this particular area of, okay, I did the whole thing. I said all the stuff in the TL where we're rolling, we're rocking and rolling, we're doing things. And then you get to the part of silence or overhearing your kids be like, I don't know what the hell just happened. And then teachers don't know how to react. I know there were some classes where I certainly didn't know how to react. And then you don't know what are the next steps. Like those are very concrete, perfect next steps. Like I would have loved to know that when I was still in the classroom of go back, reverse a little bit and say, okay, we just talked about that. You had some questions. Now let's do it in Espanol. Hay preguntas, and you just went through that whole thing. And that bit that you said about how it's important to press them for that moment and make sure that they're comfortable with having questions, not knowing what is being said or having a moment of not understanding, that is really important to establish that's really really helpful. So thank you for sharing that. Do you think that there's ever been a moment in your classroom this semester so far where you've seen like, wow, this is some real growth from where we started in September with this or August of, wow, this was a battle now, and now I'm starting to see it like smooth out. I'm seeing my patience really pay off.
Yes. I'm definitely like seeing those moments. I think for me has been seeing them in small groups. So I recently, and we have to finish up this activity next week, but we did like station activities. And so I had explained to them, I went through, they have 6 different stations. One of them involved listening to a song in the target language and then answering some questions and then making a brief connection. The other one was, here are the questions on the wall, here are the sentence strip responses, put them together. The other one was like this maze that I like found on like our on the world language like department drive. It looked a little old school, but um I really liked it for a variety of reasons where you had like your pronoun and then you had like the place because the current unit we're finishing up is called like in mi ciudad. And so they had to figure out, okay, what direction am I going to go in according to the pronoun and the correct form of quote unquote here. And part of me, at first I was like, I'm not really, I'm more of like a grammar and context kind of gal. Like that's like my jam, like the reading, the speaking, the communicative tasks. And so, but I really wanted to include that because I was like, you know what? Let me see how they're going to do this. I want to hear their discussions, and so forth. And so I had a writing station where they had to write about their plans for the weekend. And then there was another one where they had to choose um, a reading. I coined it as like, this is like level 1 reading, level 2, per se. And so it was number one, it was interesting to see who worked with who because I told them, I said, you can work with whichever group whoever it is you want to work with, you can work with them. They already sit in, groups like in my room. So I wanted to give them, like that freedom. And so seeing that, I learned even more about my students where I was like, oh, I'm like, that's interesting. Okay. I'm like, yeah, I could totally see them hanging out. Yeah, that makes sense. Um,
Ah, it's
And yeah,
cute.
I know, yeah, it's like so cute. And then I noticed number two, I noticed one of my students who had really, you know, she she's grown. Like she's grown tremendously in the language, but being able to see her take lead at an activity and explain it like, no, we're supposed to be doing this, and then you need to make sure that you do this. This is where we're at. Okay, come on, we need to get this done. And so that was great. Like I was like, whoa. Um, and then lately, the one thing I really love has been hearing them talk about what it is they're doing and discussing. So when they're writing something, like for example, the weekend, like, "Oh, okay, so how do you say, oh, remember it's like boy, because you're going to say, I'm going to go do this, and watching them look, no, that's spelled wrong. This is how you spell it. It's on this note sheet. So just really seeing that, like that was like a blessing to me and it was encouraging to me. Because within our school community, we have what we call like a profile of a Viking. Viking is our mascot. And so one of the themes or topics of like the profile is problem solving and fostering like that interdependence. I think I'm saying that right.
Mhm.
Because I would notice like in the beginning of the year where it was just like, well, I need for you to like tell me or show me. I don't want to do it. I want you to do it. And I remember having to really, walk, I don't want to say a fine line, but like, have some balance of like, I don't want to push them too much, but at the same time, I don't want them to think that, okay, well, Miss London's just going to do it for me. And then I'm going to I wanted to make sure that I was giving them enough encouragement and, affirmation that they were on the right track, but also pushing them to, you can do this. So there was a lot of, really encouraging and building up like their confidence, like in the beginning of the year. And so, fast forward to now and seeing them and hearing them talk and support like their their classmates, like in groups. Like it's such a great thing. It's just such a great thing. Um, and even, the students that are just, I'm just here because I need a credit, even, you have that. And then you have the other students that are like, yeah, I'm really interested, or either, yeah, I'm here because, my parent or guardian made me or whatever. But seeing that, seeing their problem solving skills like grow has just been amazing. It's just been really good. Yeah, it's been huge.
That's amazing. They're so lucky to have you. What an amazing teacher perspective that there's so much more happening in class besides just, acquiring is huge and so mentally taxing, but you're right. There's so much other stuff going on too that your students are really growing through this process. That's what we're hoping for, right? That's the whole reason that we're here. That's so cool. So, wow, this has been really amazing to learn from your experience of adjusting to how students react to your pace, and with this whole theme of being flexible but also remaining true to what you know is good for you, is authentic to you and good for students, that knowing to keep on that right pace and pushing the, hey, we're going to do this in the target language. This has been really affirming, I'm sure, for people who are fighting that good fight of trying to keep in the target language. What do you hope for teachers who are listening to this? What do you think is a great takeaway for them? And what do you hope that they learn from our conversation today?
So I would definitely say um that you all are not alone. um Everything that teachers are going through right now, I go through it on a daily basis. And I think the important thing is being consistent. Like if you are in a place where it's like, yeah, I really do want to increase the amount of target language I'm using in the classroom, like being consistent and taking it slow. Um, it's okay to, repeat yourself like 50, 100 times. That is perfectly okay. And the important thing with that is like not giving up and not thinking like, oh, they're just never gonna, because that's not true, because they can and they will. And you don't have to be perfect either. Um, I don't say everything perfectly. Sometimes whenever a student asks me like, what does this mean, I'm like, yeah, say these, say blah 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 blah, and then I'm like, wait, let me go double check and make sure so that I'm not coming up with my version of Spanglish. So but yeah, I would just say being consistent, um patient, and choosing, also with that too, like choosing your battles. Like I was talking to my department chair, and what I mean by that is that I used to, on a daily basis, I used to give like all of my instructions like in Spanish at my previous like school community, like all the time. And so I remember my department chair, fast forward now, he was just like, you know what? He's like, focus in on, like looking at the tasks that they're doing. Focus in on the tasks that they're doing. Not saying that you can't, give your instructions in Spanish. And I mean, it really depends on what level you're teaching and where the students are at.
Mhm.
Um, I know that, you know, when there's like action involved and I'm acting things out, yes, my students do understand now at this point. Um, but really, looking at, that input piece of like, the reading, the speaking, the tasks, and so forth. And then, taking it one step at a time, like one day at a time. If it's, oh man, I only spoke like, 70 or 60% today, it's okay. It's not going to be like 90 or wherever you want it to be every single day, because we encounter different things that are happening. And it also depends on, what your goals are and where your students are at. And gradually, as you continue to be repetitive, they will get to that point that you would like for them to be at. And then next thing you know, you will be at that point that you want to be at as far as the percentage of target language you want to use. So, yeah.
Ugh, that speaks to me very much because actually, I don't know if you knew this, but I knew it was a good time to have you on the podcast because my phrase for the year is consistency beats perfect. I'm finding that in like everything that I do, that when you're striving for perfection, it actually is working against you. That consistent B plus effort wins every time. Like just showing up is half the battle. And for teaching, it really is like showing up and giving an effort to do target language and push your students. It's not going to be perfect, but just like you said, it consistency makes a difference. And now I know that teachers will have a lot of great ideas for how to make it easier for them, thanks to what you've shared today. So thank you so much for being here with me virtually and for sharing your wisdom with us on the experience of what it's like to adjust to your pace. But you shared so much with us this wisdom of all your experience that you have of making sure that target language is attainable and that it works for both parties, that it's fun for you and accessible for your students, even if they don't think that right at the beginning. That's amazing. So I'm sure that people are going to want to learn more from you after they've listened to this. So can you tell everybody what are some ways that they can connect with you and learn more from you after hearing this awesome episode?
All right, awesome. So I have I'm in a variety of different places, but I'm gonna make it super just give you all one place. If you check out bit.ly/K London, you can find everything that I am involved in there. If you're on Facebook, the page is Trailblaze in Language Learning. And then I also hang out on Instagram. That is at Classes Day London. And my other Instagram page is at Trailblaze Lang. But you all will be able to find all that if you just go to the bit.ly link and everything is there. But yeah.
Wonderful. And we will have that. I'll have that in the show notes for y'all. So you'll be able to clickety click it very easily. Kia, thank you so much for this. It's always wonderful to work with you and hang out and learn from you.
Thank you. This has been so great and so refreshing, and I appreciate it. And I hope you all were able to get something, get some nuggets. So,
No, they were for sure. All right. Bye for now.
all right, bye.